go on mute when they're not speaking. Thank you.
That will kick in very shortly, Chairman, so if you want to begin.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Twyman and Mr. Blake. Thank you very much for your technical support. Much appreciated. I would like to welcome everyone. I'd like to remind everyone that this meeting is being live broadcast and recorded. I'd like to firstly ask if there's any apologies, Mr. Twyman. Thank you.
Yes, Chairman, we have apologies from Councillors Burrell and Jones.
Thank you. I understand Councillor Jones is absent through illness, but he's on the mend and is at hospital. So I'm very pleased to hear that that good news and wish him well for a full recovery. Are there any declarations of interest? I can't see any. Confirmation of the minutes, the Cabinet is for the Cabinet to do, not for us, and they were included in the pack. There's no urgent items I'm aware of. The minutes of this meeting will be provided to the Cabinet before their meeting. There's no references from committees. The items that have been drawn down are item 7 and item 10. I'll read item 7 and item 10. Therefore, items 8, 9 and 11 are noted without comment. Move on to item 7, which is the draft rent arrears policy. I'm not sure whether Mr. Dosad or Mr. Eady, whether you want to introduce this item or not. Thank you.
I'm happy to do that, Chairman, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Evening, members. The draft arrears policy that you have in front of you is a very important document for the housing team, certainly in these uncertain times. Rental income, as you know, pays for all of the landlord services that the council provides. So it's absolutely vital that we strike the balance between being very good at collecting the rent as quickly and efficiently as we can, and balance out against those that absolutely need help in paying their rent, against those that have no intention of paying their rent. And we're hoping that this policy pitches somewhere in the middle of all those aims to give us a robust policy moving forward. It's replacing a previous policy from 2013, so it's more than due. And the main bulk of the report, I'm sure you've read, and happy to take any questions at the end of the session. But the main issues that the report looks to cover that it hasn't previously are things like the introduction of universal credit, the court pre-action protocols. It is a necessity on us as a landlord that we need to adhere to and follow correctly and robustly in order to have any chance of having a positive repossession at the end of a process. Taking into account COVID-19 and the Coronavirus Act, and basically a theme throughout of additional support for tenants throughout the process and early intervention, which we've found is key. Consultation on the report has been undertaken with the Dartford Tenant and Leaseholders Forum, and had some very good input and positive in terms of how we want to push the policy forward. And I think in this current uncertain times, that this policy may stay under review for its whole life, because things are changing quite quickly. There's things happening, which I'm sure we'll talk about in the world, that are affecting people's daily lives, and that therefore has their impact on their ability to pay their rent. But what we want to be and are is a supportive landlord that will help those that absolutely need it, but deal robustly with those that have no intention of paying. Members are therefore asked to approve the contents of the report and the attached policy, and I'm happy to take any questions that members might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dosad. I've seen Councillor Harman indicate, then Councillor Gaskin, and then Councillor Ben Musa. We'll go in that order, but can I just point out, Mr. Dosad, the date on the front of the policy is January 2020, and I've got no intention of living through 2020 again if I could possibly avoid it. Don't think anyone would. So, Councillor Harman first. Thank you.
Sorry, Matthew. No, I didn't indicate. It must have been a inverted movement.
You must have been exploring the functionality. That's fine. Councillor
Yeah,
Gaskin.
thank you.
We can't see you. And thank you.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Hello. Yes. Hello. Well, Peter, thank you for attending the meeting. I would actually like some clarification on some numbers. I understand that the council charges rent in line with the local housing allowance, and there's also a provision of some free weeks. I understand 4 weeks when no rent is due.
Yes.
So I think, well, I have seen the calculation that Peter has kindly provided to Councillor Ben Musa, which confuses me a little, because the current rate for 2-bedroom flat house, it's about £211, something like this, which is above the local housing allowance. But the calculation then goes on to dividing it by 52 weeks. So this would lower it into, to meet the LHA, the local housing allowance. However, if you divide it by 52 weeks, this would suggest that there are no free weeks. So if you calculate it based on 3 weeks, for 3 weeks, therefore 48 weeks paid, then it goes above that rate. So could you please clarify to me the definition of the 3 weeks? What does it mean? Because it's
Councillor Gaskin, is there a specific section number or page number that you're referring to? It'd be helpful for councillors if possible. Thank you.
It's 0.6.1, which says rent must be paid on time. Okay, and the rent is due on Monday of every week.
Thank you.
And it then goes on that there are some free weeks when no rent is due, and these are usually in April and December. So like clarification of the 3 weeks, what do they mean?
Okay. I think there's 2 issues here. I think there's the conversation that I've had with Councillor Emma Ben Musa separately, and the issue of the 48 weeks compared to the 52 weeks. So I'll do the latter first. Our rent year is counted on 48 rent weeks. Mm-hmm. As you rightly say, there's 2 weeks. Rent free is misleading because you're still paying 52 weeks rent by over 48 week cycles, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So in effect, it's not free. Mm-hmm. What we're trying to do is release the pressure for people at perhaps the most expensive 2 times of the year. I think the April one, is a bit of an opinion, but undoubtedly Christmas is expensive for everybody. So, you could have the April one in the summer holidays. I don't know. I mean, that's probably up for debate. Historically, it's been the 2 weeks over Easter and the 2 weeks around Christmas and New Year. What that then means is that the rent figure, when you look at it on an individual week basis, some properties are over LHA on a week, but when you relate that back to the 48 week year, they're actually below LHA. We don't rent any properties above LHA. The issue that Councillor Emma Ben Musa and I have been talking about has come up recently because of the properties that we've purchased from the open market. Former right to buy properties members will be hopefully aware of that programme to try to increase our housing stock. What we've found is, and due to the definition that MCHLG have given us and Treasury in terms of what we then set the rents at, we've had a situation where the rents are proportionately quite a bit higher than the same property that was when the rent was set since the property's been in Dartford's ownership. So we're actually looking at that now, because what it's had is an unintended consequence is that we sometimes get people that are coming to the top of the list shortlist wise in terms of bidding. But then when we do the affordability check, they can't afford the rent, or the rent pushes them to a point where it could make their future tenancy unviable. So we've had to look at that. What we've done with those people is make sure that they come to the top of the next property list that becomes available that they can afford. But we're having to take a step back to look at the rents, and we're currently trying to come up with a calculation in terms of the LHA that makes it affordable for everybody. But what I will say is we haven't set a rent that's anything more than 85% of LHA, even with the new buildings, the new properties. But the difficulty is that some people find it extremely difficult to pay, particularly if they're working and they're not on full benefits. So it's something for us to look at. Again, it's an unintended consequence of a positive project in terms of acquiring new properties. But that's the explanation for the two discrepancies. But we don't let any properties over LHA based on a full rent year.
Okay, well, this does make sense. It just the use of the word free sort of causes confusion. So maybe rephrase it into when the months or weeks when the rent is deferred, or
Great.
Okay.
Councillor Ben Musa, has Mr. Dosad killed two birds with one stone, or is your query unrelated?
No, mine was completely different. Hi,
Okay.
Peter.
Go ahead, thank you.
I was really pleased to see this report. I think it's a really good, thorough report, but I do have some questions if you don't mind answering them. So I am pleased to see that you've acknowledged that UC does cause an issue, especially transferring from one benefit onto the other. You can have a 5-week wait where nothing is paid, no housing element, anything. So you are going to get in debt with the council. However, it says after week 1, we send letters out. Is that still the case? Sorry, I've gone black there. Is that still the case where there's no money coming in for 5 weeks? Are you still going to keep sending them letters when there's nothing they can do about it?
The difficulty is, Councillor, is if we don't follow the court protocol, we are going to have a problem down the line. So what the situation is, in some ways, it's a different subject. It's a bit like the gas servicing, really. You have to send certain letters at certain times to enable you to proceed to the right part of the court process. Now, in many ways, it's a negative policy, you're right. But as a landlord, we can't not do that. I can't afford to be losing a month, 6 weeks into a process because we didn't serve the right letters. But what will be happening with every one of those letters, there will be contact from us to that resident, that tenant, to explain to them why that letter's being sent. It's not a pressure, it's an active part of the process. Unfortunately, if the court process dictated we didn't have to do it, we wouldn't. But we don't have a choice, really. And as you know, we have to collect the rent, so I have to be in the best position to do that as and when we need to, if we have to. So that's the answer. But the letters will still be going out. I mean, at the moment, it's even less relevant because obviously there's a complete arrears related eviction ban. So anything that's come up through COVID, for example, we can't actively do anything court-wise anyway, but we're still obliged to follow the process because at some point we may get to court because people won't pay us. So it's a difficult one. It's one that we've had lots of conversations about, but what we have been able to do is to manage people's anxieties in terms of what the outcome of that will be. And I think that's probably the best of a very difficult situation, if I'm honest.
Yeah, well, that's what I wanted to hear because they're already under pressure, they're already stressed, and they're struggling. I have got another question. If the arrears falls behind 9 months' rent, do the proceedings cease?
No. In terms of, sorry, I'm not sure I understand it.
Let me see if I can find the right. Have you got the report in front of you?
Got the policy to hand. I have my very able expert online, hopefully, though. So between us, I'm sure we can.
Have you got a page number or section number, Councillor Ben Musa? That'd be helpful.
Yeah, it's 3.53.
Thank you.
So it tells you there that the most serious circumstances include extreme rent arrears equivalent to 9 months' rent.
Yeah.
And then we go to the actual procedure of, you know, going through the courts, etc.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm hoping I highlighted it. I think that it said that it has to be, if it's paid back, things stop as long as 9 months, as long as it doesn't go over 9 months. So say if the court contacts them and says you have to pay this back, but they only pay you 6 months back,
Right.
does that
Right.
close the case?
I think there are two things. I think the 9 months specifically relates to the COVID issue. We can't actively pursue anybody that's got into significant arrears since COVID started. That's the 9 months. Pre that, we are able to take action if the arrears are significant before March 23rd, I think is the date they've used, and that they've continued to accrue. We haven't done that, but we have done ASB. No, that's a lie. We have done one case, but that was already an empty property. And we did an ASB case. But anything in terms of arrears, the 9 month only relates to COVID. So basically, we're not able to progress anybody to court currently if they fell into significant arrears since March. So that's the first thing. But in terms of an active arrears case, what would normally happen if someone was prepared to pay us 6 months, we would enter into an agreement to pay back what they owe us over a period of time. We do very few evictions, and you know, historically, you know, I'm surprised it doesn't get into double figures very often over a year, and that's normally what happens if someone pays. They'll enter into an agreement, and then that would cease the process, subject to them keeping up with their payment plan, rather than giving us 6 months whack in one go. We'll obviously take it, but they need to keep up with their payment plan, so that would cease the court proceedings. If that makes sense.
Yes, it does. One last question, then I'll be quiet and I'll let Kelly take over. No recourse to public funds. Do we rent to people that have no recourse to public funds? And if we do, are they able to access the discretionary housing payments to cover that 5 week gap that might have been caused?
We don't. That's a KCC responsibility.
Right.
But we do obviously get involved in clients that cross over between the two of us. I am aware that there are some cases in Dartford. In terms of DHB, that can be the only way they're paying for more. They're coming from KCC funds. But we don't have any major dealings with a recourse until they have eligibility one way or the other. That's when we become involved. It's about the tiers of, you know, Kent, and the fact that Kent are, you know, a top tier authority and we're the district.
But can they join the register if they've got no recourse to public funds? Say they fall into debt and there's no way of getting any help rather than finding that money. Then normally no recourse to public funds is around their immigration status, as you know. Yeah.
And we won't anybody join the list until their immigration status is clarified.
Okay, and then once that's clarified, you do become.
Yeah. They become a resident of the borough or not, as the case may be, and can apply to any housing register that they like. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for answering all of those, Peter.
Problem.
I have Councillor Gaskin, and then Councillor McLean, and then Councillor Green. Councillor Gaskin, have you got another question or?
Yes, I do have
Okay.
an additional
Go ahead.
question.
Thank you.
It's regarding the point 5.2, which says the council also has the discretion to offer additional services which have to be paid for as a part of rent or additional service charges. Okay, and that's fine. And tenants will be consulted before the new services are introduced and given opportunity to end their tenancy before the new services are and charges are introduced. Well, that's fine, but my question is, let's say the tenant decides, well, they are unable or unwilling, but more likely unable to pay those additional charges, and they choose to end the tenancy. What happens then? Will they be deemed intentionally homeless? Will there be support for them to find alternative accommodation? So what was the support for them in case they choose to end that tenancy because they are not able to pay the additional service charge?
The first thing probably is worth clarifying what those additional service charges are. They're usually things like communal cleaning, grounds maintenance, etc. What would normally happen in that scenario is it's usually because the property is too large for them in most accounts, and then what we would look to do is we would look to downsize and make arrangements. If it wasn't that situation, then I think I'd have to say that we'd have to look at each case on its merits and see what we could do. But the reality of the situation is that, you know, the service charges are nominal. They are subsidised by the council. And I would be very worried about somebody that couldn't afford, you know, a small management fee for those kind of services. But what we would then do is we would involve the housing inclusion officer and make sure that that family, that applicant, was able to access everything they were entitled to in terms of benefits or support. And that would usually answer it, council. I've never ever come across in my, hate to say, 30-year career in housing where people have struggled to a point where they've had to move out because of their service charges. But I hasten to say, if that was a situation, they'd be fully supported and we would come up with some solution, because we wouldn't, as a landlord, let somebody lose their house because they couldn't pay for the community cleaning or something like that.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Councillor McLean.
Thank you. Just a comment first and then one very minor question, Peter, if I may. I think the policy generally covers a real balance of being unashamedly determined to collect rent, as we should, as the landlord. We shouldn't shy away from that, but also compassion and around the fact that people fall onto hard times, particularly at this time with coronavirus. So I think the policy goes a long way to doing that, coupled with the other support we do give people, discretionary support around council tax payments and stuff as well. So I think overall there is a good package for people, and particularly our most vulnerable residents and those who are not earning as high as others. The question was specifically about introductory tenancies. I'm not sure if we do them or not. That's the first question. I did read through and I couldn't see anything about introductory tenancies. Does this apply to an introductory tenancy, this policy? And if it doesn't, why? And I suppose really, if it does apply to introductory tenancies, should we not have a separate policy for those? Because obviously people are on a trial period to see if they're able to sustain the tenancy, and shouldn't we have a different policy around rent arrears if in their first couple of months they're already struggling? You know, should we be going through this process or something else? In answer to your question, we do them, and people are taking a 12-month transition from an introductory to a flexible tenancy. In terms of treating them differently, I think we would argue that we shouldn't. I think we would argue that we need to treat people consistently. And I think, you know, the arrears policy builds in this understanding that, you know, anybody on universal credit, for example, will have 5 weeks when it's unlikely that they're going to have any income. So I think there's enough, or we feel certainly that there's enough support within the report to not have to deal with people separately. I'm not sure what you would do differently for an introductory tenant that you wouldn't do for anybody that fell on hard times anyway. And I think if we were treating people differently, that could potentially be a criticism of us anyway. So I feel as from a sort of service perspective that treating everybody the same is the way to go with arrears, because, as I said, we've got the support now, the additional housing inclusion officer posts that we've got, the prevention models that are built into the process now. I don't see that there's any real need personally for a separate system. Well, that's exactly what I wanted to hear, to be honest, because I know there are councils who run different policies for introductory tenants, and I think under these circumstances, I think that's the right approach to start as we mean to go on, sort of thing, and not treat them differently, and give them that. So thank you. That's all I had. Overall, it's very good, Peter. Thank you very much. Thank you. I mean, I'm pleased to hear that. What I would add is that the first year of an introductory tenancy is very much that. It's a training session. You know, it's helping the tenants to understand what their obligations are, and more, you know, as importantly, what our expectations of them are. And I think if we treat them as one cohort, people tend to get the message a lot clearer. It also makes it inevitably much easier for my staff to administer if we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. So thanks for that. Cheers.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report and all the information there, Peter. I just want to clarify a few kind of minor points. Obviously, this year we've seen lots of people go on to universal credit who've never been on benefits before. I think it's something like a 90% increase in between May and October. You know, lots of people who aren't used to the situation they're in, and you know, perhaps struggling to access the things they need to. So there's some really good points about signposting and so on in the policy, but I just wanted to clarify them while you're here. So for example, in Appendix A, it says that the week 1, the rent demand letter is sent out. At that point, when you get that letter, would you get a list of, say, Step Change and other kind of advice agencies that would be sent out at that point, would it?
That's on the back of the letter. And
I think that's really, really helpful.
Yeah.
And when people take on a tenancy now, would they be given a list of those same sorts of phone numbers, that sort of thing?
It's all in the sign up pack as well. I mean, and they'll also instantly get a call from one of the rent assistants, the first rung of the ladder, saying, have you got the letter? Do you understand what's there? What can we do to help? Have you done this? So that's all part of the Enshrine process now.
I think that's fantastic, because what I find often is that people are so kind of stunned and fearful of finding out what their situation is that it's hard to take that first step of getting help. So I think that's really good. Thank you. That's all I wanted to ask.
I mean, we also go through on sign-ups. We'll also go through all the paperwork in terms of what their universal credit application will be, make sure they do it. So we're actually getting in very early to make sure they're fully aware of what they're entitled to and making the right applications to the right places, because that ultimately benefits us.
Absolutely. And then if you're going on to universal credit for the first time, as a lot of people now are, I think that people aren't expecting that 5-week wait.
No.
Was saying, and I think knowing where you stand and so on is vital to stop further problems, as you say.
Agreed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dosad. The comments will be noted in the minutes for Cabinet, and they will take them into account. Mr. Dosad, Mr. Eadie, thank you very much for joining. We'll move on to the next item now. Thank you. Item 8 and 9, as I said earlier, have not been called down. They'll be noted. Item 10 has been called down, the council's calendar. Does anyone have any questions or comments on the calendar? And presumably, Mr. Twyman, are you the person to answer the questions? But perhaps we'll see what the questions are, I suppose. Sorry, Councillor Green, thank you.
Thank you. The point I wanted to raise is I appreciate the dates are really set out with a view to bypassing August, which is obviously a really difficult time for people in terms of attending meetings. I wonder if I could just raise that there are meetings in the last week of July, which is a part of the school holidays and a really difficult week to attend for a lot of people. Primarily myself, but I'm sure others too. I just wanted to raise that tends to be a very difficult week for those of us that have got school-aged children, and just wanted to ask if possible, if that could be avoided. I appreciate if it can't, but I thought I'd raise it while we were here.
If I could possibly come back on that, Chairman.
Yeah.
The reason that we set out the provisional calendar for 2 years ahead is obviously to try and give all councillors as much notice of the provisional dates of meetings as possible, and obviously to enable you sufficient time to try and arrange things so that you're able to attend as many meetings as possible. In arriving at the dates for the calendar meetings, we try our best to avoid school holidays, half terms, the political party conference season as well. We try and avoid those weeks when the party conferences are in full flow. But in practical terms, with a cycle of 4 quarterly meetings, it is literally impossible to avoid every week when there's a half term, a major school holiday, or a party political event. So we do our best. And I hear what you're saying about the final week in July, and I can take a look at that and see if we have got any scope for freeing that up as well. But it's a fairly busy calendar, and I fear that avoiding that week entirely will be very difficult.
I completely appreciate that. I was really raised it because that's the cheapest week of the school holidays. So I had a bit of a personal motive. But yeah, I just thought I'd raise it while we're here. I appreciate it's really difficult. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Twyman, and I'm impressed with Councillor Green's optimism that we'll be able to go when you're on holiday this summer. Councillor McLean.
It was just a comment really around it's not uncommon. It is rare, but it's not uncommon that we get requests to change meeting dates. I seem to remember last year we changed the licensing committee to allow the Labour group to, there's something that had been pre-booked for quite a long time, and I think the chairmans do have discretion if something does come up, or group meetings, or and I think it was during conference season as well, so it was a little bit dodgy. So I suppose the only point is there is some flexibility with discussions with Democratic Services, the directors and chairmans of committees, if we do need to move things around where it's obvious that there isn't going to be good attendance.
Good point, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, comments will be noted in the minutes for Cabinet to bear in mind. Final item, number 11, has not been drawn down, so therefore I will bring the meeting to a conclusion. I would like to thank you all for attending, and as we've finished early, you can all start reading your GAC pack for Monday. Got plenty of time to get through it. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Take care.
Good
Night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.